Okay, so here's a brisket that we're going to be working with today. As you see here, we got a 6.34 pound brisket. You'll notice with our briskets that they are lighter. That's typically because our cattle are smaller. That way they finish on grass properly. Look at this guy pulled out of the package. So there is two parts to a brisket. This thicker part is called the point. This part down here is called the flat. If you go into like a Costco or something and buy a whole brisket, there's going to be a huge fat covering on here. And if you do, you typically want to take a lot of that off and leave probably a 1/4 inch down here, and up here on the point you can take a lot of it. This chunk here we'll probably end up taking off. Here on the back side, we just want to clean up and get as much of this silver skin off that we can, so that that's not there, because that stuff's not going to render down. And any fat that's really hard or not pulled up, we're going to go ahead and cut off. You see this intermuscular fat? For grass-fed cattle, this is a really, really nice brisket with a lot of fat inside of there. So right here, the first trim that I like to do is there's a crease of fat that runs right here, and it typically doesn't like to render down very well. I'm just going to go ahead and slice that out. If you buy something from the store, like I said, there's going to be a lot bigger piece of fat here, so you're going to have to do quite a bit more trimming than I'm doing here. So we just like to cut that off so that both edges are flat. So there's your first chunk of fat we're going to go ahead and take off. And then we're going to start trimming some of this excess off. And there's some silver skin here we're going to try to get under. Okay, so I want you to notice one thing that's really important is we see that the meat grains are running this way. That's really important to remember, because this here is our flat and it runs all the way up over the top of the point. But at the point, the grains of the meat are running a different way. So when you slice this, you'll slice up to the point and then you'll end up slicing another direction. You'll slice this one at this direction and then you'll end up slicing the point at this direction. Flip over here to this fat cap, and we see that there's a lot of fat. We got this huge chunk of fat. I'm just gonna hack that whole guy off. It's just a big chunk of fat that's not gonna render. Like I said, any of this excess fat up here on the point, we can go ahead and take off because we don't need it. Because this fat's pretty thin, I'm gonna go ahead and leave all this. If you had a lot of fat here, you would trim this off. But these grass-fed briskets are just not gonna pick up fat like your traditional brisket. Okay, so now I got most of my fat trimmed. Down here at this end, you see how thin this is? There's barely any meat there. So that's gonna burn and not be very flavorful. We want at least a thumb width of meat. So as long as the thumb can fit in here, that's where we want to end up cutting it. So we're going to end up doing one of these, but also you want to keep in mind the angle of the way that the grains run, because then you can just go ahead and do one of these, and now you know where to slice the point after you're done cooking. So that's pretty good. Let's go ahead and take that corner off. We're going to take this off too. And we're going to go ahead, square this up a little more. Trying to make sure that that meat is thick enough that it's not just going to burn away. So that's about how we're going to trim. I think I'm going to take this chunk off. It was pretty thick. but I think I'm gonna go ahead and leave the rest of it. And now it's time for the secret weapon. So briskets of any quality, the hardest thing to do with a brisket when you're cooking it is keep the moisture in the meat. So one way you can do that is you can go ahead and inject this brisket with beef tallow to just give you more fat content. The best beef tallow you can buy is Wagyu beef tallow. This can take a mediocre or an okay brisket and make it absolutely delicious. So we're gonna go ahead and cheat a little bit and we're gonna inject it with some Wagyu beef tallow.
Not satisfied yet, Jess? I thought you were done trimming.
I was, and then I seen how thick this fat was. This is actually the seam that I was talking about earlier. See how big these chunks of fat are? I confused myself, so that was a mistake, but now we got that straightened out. And then we've got this fat in here. We'll just go ahead and cut all that fat out, and that's much better. Much better trim. There we go. Now we're all trimmed up. Okay, so all I've done is I took a couple scoops of Wagyu beef tallow, I put it in a pan, got it to render down so that it's a liquid, put it in my syringe, and now I'm just gonna stick it in and start injecting. You'll see the meat pop up, and then tallow will come out of other locations. It's a good thing to probably have. As you can see, this tallow's squirting out and I can feel it. It's a good thing to have butcher paper and extra ways to catch, because this tallow does kind of go everywhere. And you can hear it, and we're just going to go ahead and coat the outside with some of that tallow too. What?
You're spilling it all over the floor.
Yeah, that's what happened.
No, that's not what happens. You turn the syringe up so fluid doesn't come out of the syringe.
So we've got our brisket good and injected with beef tallow, and it is everywhere. So instead of using the mustard as a binder, typically we'd use mustard as a binder. I'm just gonna go ahead and let the beef tallow do its work and use the beef tallow as a binder, and just make sure we've got it good and covered in beef tallow. And then I'm gonna grab our seasoning for today. For today, we're gonna be using Meat Church Barbecue Holy Cow. Really good. And we're gonna heavily coat our brisket to help build a good crust. Get those edges too. Both sides, go ahead and now our next and final step, this is a pretty cool little tool. We're gonna go ahead and pop this cover up. We're gonna cover it up and we're gonna put it in the fridge to dry brine for about 6 or 8 hours before we go to the grill. It's gonna help those seasonings sink in, help the meat sweat, and it's really gonna help the overall flavor. And then at about 3 o'clock tomorrow morning, we're gonna be putting this on the smoker. So make sure you guys tune in for the next part and getting this guy on the smoker.